Welcome to the Imperial Truth. I'm your host, Eric, and it was the best of scenarios. It was the worst of scenarios. Today, we're going to start a Forging the Narrative sub-series in which we're going to talk about some scenarios, talk about what I think makes a good scenario, and eventually build some generic-ish scenarios for you guys to use if you want, incorporate into your own groups. I know a lot of people are doing this. I know of, I think SN Battle Reports recently released some. I haven't had a chance to really look at them. I know that I think the Lost Legions podcast did something with some scenarios. I know that the Honest Wargamer has done some as well. I really haven't had a chance to look at some of their work, but I think I'm coming at this from a slightly different perspective, and we'll talk about that today. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoy this stuff, let me know and like and subscribe and all that stuff, and feel free to steal anything that I say or talk about for your own group. The whole point of this is to build community and to talk about these things. I do think that one aspect of how I'm going to approach this, aside from the obvious aspect of a more narrative focus, is also going to be the idea that Mechanicum just isn't built for scenario play as presented in the Age of Darkness rulebook. We don't have any line. Comptroller really doesn't work the way it's supposed to work, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And so I think that we do need to keep that in mind as we move forward, is that there are some factions that are not going to play this game quite the same as others. But let's talk about this. Let's get in here and discuss this. So we'll start with our core scenario rules, and we will come back to our core scenario rules in our next video whenever we begin to build scenarios and flesh them out. Just as a little bit of a guideline in terms of where I see this going. We're going to talk about these two scenarios today. One I think is a good scenario, one I think is a very bad scenario. I'm sure if you've played the core scenarios, you're aware of the bad scenario. So we're going to discuss that today and sort of flesh out what I think makes a good scenario. In our next video in this series, we will talk about a sort of generic scenario setups, and again, I'll allude to that today. And then we'll come up with a generic scenario environmental rules that you can toss in. So like scrap code infections or rad clouds or something like that can add additional flair to the game. And then I think a little bit beyond that, we'll talk about some objective placement and deployment and things like that. So kind of trying to create a situation where by the end of this, there are a dozen or so scenarios that are available that you can maybe use in pickup games. I wouldn't suggest that. Again, we'll get to that in just a minute. So let's talk about this. Core rules in the Age of Darkness rulebook. Line X adds X points to the value of an objective when you score it during the victory subphase. So objectives are usually worth 1, 2, or 3 points. And there are line 1, 2, and I think 3 models. And so if you were on a 2-point objective with a line 2 unit, you would get 4 points for that objective as opposed to getting 2 points for that objective. In addition to this, line also adds to the number of models that are counted when you're trying to determine control. So if you have 5 Terminators on an objective and they have Vanguard 1, they don't have line, they count as 5 models, even though they are big, tough, mean Terminators. If you have 10, let's say, tactical Marines, which are, I think, line 2, they would count as 30 models on that objective because you add the number of line, which I think is not a good rule. I think the idea that 10 tactical Marines are going to control an objective, or 5 tactical Marines are going to control an objective, versus say a Primarch right, is just laughable, and is sort of gamey. And when I say gamey, it, gamey is we are leaning more into the board game aspect of the hobby than into the historic simulation side of the hobby, if that makes sense. It just doesn't seem very logical, but that is the rule for line. Vanguard, Vanguard X scores X points when one of the following two things happen. You destroy the last model that is controlling or contesting. That's very important. Controlling or contesting an objective with shooting attacks. So you can either shoot somebody off an objective, which is harder to do now that people have sort of figured it out, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Or you can melee somebody off an objective. That is, you can cause them to fall back or be massacred in the combat phase. Now, note that the unit doing this has to be majority Vanguard, but only has to have basically one attack that contributes to this. So if they have any attacks that contribute to doing this, you get the points for it. You do not have to be controlling or contesting an objective when you are killed, because you can't control or contest objectives when you are in melee. So you can do that. Vanguard units only ever score 1 point for controlling an objective. So if you have your Vanguard 2 unit go in and they sweep a unit off an objective in melee, and then at the end of the turn, you would only score 1 point on that objective, even if that objective is worth 2 or 3 points. But you would get the Vanguard points. You get the Vanguard 2 for killing that unit as well. Support units can only ever score X points, where that's equal to support. So if we are talking about Mechanicum, the Thanatars, our big stompy robots, they are support 1, which means they can only ever score 1 point for any objectives. Now, as a quick note, this does apparently, according to everybody in the comments, nobody has taken my side in this, nobody that I've seen. This does negate comptroller. So we have in Mechanicum, if you're not familiar with Mechanicum, they have a special rule called comptroller, and comptroller is on the Archmagos, the Magos, the Magister, and the Tech Priest. I think are all the guys that have it. And basically, it's more victory points that you could score. So a Magos has comptroller 2. So in theory, if you have a unit of Castellex and they're on an objective and you are Cybernetica, so they can score, and you score a 2-point objective and you have comptroller 2, you would score 4 points. Now, this is not like line in that those automata suddenly count for more models towards the objective. That isn't the way it works. And in addition, it apparently, because the Vanguard says you can only ever score 1, you don't get any more for the comptroller. So yeah, that's the way I've been playing it. It sucks. Yeah, and it makes Mechanicum just absolutely worse in terms of controlling objectives. Expendable X reduces the value for Vanguard, First Strike, and Slay the Warlord by X to a minimum of 1. So, for example, our Tech Thralls have Expendable 3, I think, which means that they reduce whatever you score by 3 to a minimum of 1. So you'd only ever get 1 point for First Strike against them, or if you Vanguard them off of an objective, you would only ever get 1 point, because I think Vanguard 4 is as high as it goes. It is a pretty handy rule when it comes to scoring objectives. Now, I point all of these out because when we're talking about balance in the game and points and that sort of stuff, we need to understand that units are probably pointed appropriately for rules like line or Vanguard or support or whatnot. And so we have to be aware of that. We have to be cognizant of that as we're going to rewrite scenarios. We can't just make Vanguard units or line units completely irrelevant, or give support units the ability to score a lot of points, because that can be unbalancing. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But we just need to kind of have those in the back of our heads, that these are components of the rules, and if we're building scenarios into the future, we should probably consider that. That said, there are in the one of the reasons why I pushed the deadline on this video back a little bit is because in the Forges of Saturn book, there are three, I think, new scenarios. I've played one of them. They're all interesting. And I wanted to get the book and sit down with it and maybe try out another scenario and at least read through the scenarios in detail. And yeah, they're very interesting. If you haven't picked up that book, I would suggest maybe picking up that book just for access to the scenarios that are in there, or just get one for your gaming group and kind of share it. But they're good scenarios. They're much better than the core scenarios. In addition to all of this, we have this idea of primary missions, and this concept of progressive scoring that we will talk about in a minute, that I think is problematic. So our core primary missions are basically just hold objectives, usually. And I don't like that. And we'll talk about why in a minute. And then we have secondary missions, and I don't remember all of the secondary missions, but I know that there's Slay the Warlord, so kill your opponent's high command. There are already people that are like, I'm just not going to bring a high command to not give up the points, and that's fine. If you want to be that person, that's fine. Yeah, don't be gamey, guys. Like it's yeah. Anyway, there's Giant Killer. So if you kill a super heavy, last man standing, which is you have more models on the board or more units on the board than your opponent at the end of the game. And then first strike, you kill something in the first turn. And those are the secondary missions, and they're not all applicable to all scenarios, and their values vary, but usually they're between 1 and 4 points depending on the scenario. And so you have these kind of different ways to score in the core rules. So I have a problem with progressive scoring, and I think that I watch YouTube channels too. So I'm going to reference people whenever they make better points than me. I think that Winter's SEO has made more selling points in this than I have. So go check out his stuff if you're not already following him. He's a much better YouTuber than I am. But these are my gripes with progressive scoring. Number one, it's abstract. It requires abstraction, and it is immersion breaking. We often end up fighting over empty ground. We put a piece of an objective marker down, and we fight over that point. Why do we fight over that point? Because there's an objective marker there. It is not. If again, I mentioned this in a video a while ago. I come from historical gaming. We aren't normally fighting over empty ground in historical games. We are fighting over a bridge or a building or a hilltop or a wall or a fortification, or that's what we're trying to seize. Like there is something of value there that we are trying to get. And yes, if you want, you and your opponent can create a board and a narrative and an encounter that is more engaging in that way. You can do that. But what I'm saying is from the core rules. If we just sit down with the core rules and we say we're going to play a game, we're going to play a pickup game, and we're going to do this, that game is going to tend to be generic. You're going to tend to fight over empty ground in that, and I don't like that. I think that's silly. It's not the way I want my war game to be. The second problem with the progressive scoring is that it tends to run away. So this has not been. I don't think I've had enough Horus Heresy games to do this. I do know that my first Horus Heresy game was a complete blowout. Several of the others have been pretty close, but I've had several that are just like really one-sided one way or the other. And specifically in 40K. So I played 40K in since second edition, but I came back in eighth edition. and played 8th, ninth, and 10th edition. And aside from the Firefighters for Kids event, I didn't play a single 10th edition 40K game all 2025. And that was in large part because I'm just tired of that style of play, especially because again, I don't know what other people's experience is, but my experience has been either my opponent doesn't play to the scenario, and by turn two, it's over. Like there's no way you're going to catch up in points. Or B, usually my opponent, because I don't play these types of lists, brings some sort of net list that's super powerful, and it's over by turn two, right? Very rarely are you getting to turn, a 4 or 5, and it's still be kind of nail biting. We're coming down to the wire. Like usually it's a very much a win more type situation. And I've noticed that in some of the Horus Heresy scenarios, in third edition, which is not good. That's not where we want to be. That's not where I want to be. Maybe it's where you want to be, but it's not where I want to be. The last gripe I have with this, and this is not necessarily progressive scoring, but it's with this concept, is player placed objectives. Please, for the love of God, can we get rid of player placed objectives? Like, I understand that you place objectives and then you determine deployment zones. So in theory, you want to be a little bit more conservative with your objective placement, but honestly, like just put them on the board. Just make locations for the objectives, and we'll build the game around them. We'll build the terrain around them. I think you should determine deployment and objectives, and then put terrain. Honestly, and then put the terrain on top of the objectives so that you're actually fighting over real things, and you can create a story. But that's it's just not a great system. Yeah, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. I also have this other problem, and this is a little bit of a soapbox, but this is my YouTube channel, so I get to do whatever I want. I don't think we need balance. I'm just gonna say that I don't think balance is a thing. I don't think we should fight for balance. This Horse Heresy third edition is not balanced. Let's be honest. I could bring, we talked about this. I could bring all Land Raiders and all Terminators, in my Sons of Horus army, and maybe a couple drop pods with some veterans in it, and make a really narrative themed, strike for the head type, spearhead assault force. That would be exactly what the first company of the Sons of Horus did. It's their expertise. It is literally their MO. And that list is going to curb stomp most people. You're going to have a really hard time dealing with all Terminators, all veterans, all Land Raiders. It's going to be a bad time for some people. So the game doesn't have to be balanced. I don't think that we need to fight for balance. 40K has been the most balanced in 10th edition that it's ever been since I started playing in 2nd edition, and it's boring as crap. Like it is absolutely a snooze fest, and is not fun. It's just not fun to play. I'm going to go out and say that balance doesn't even equal good. I don't even think we should fight for balance. Historical battles were not balanced. Like if we think about um, the concepts behind, what makes an exciting story, they're not balanced fights. There's one side that has a clear advantage, and there's another side that has a clear disadvantage, and they're trying to, accomplish their goals. That imbalance is what gives the narrative weight. I've said this before, but one of the reasons why the story of Saul Tarvitz and the Loyalists holding out on Isstvan 3 is such a compelling narrative is because they're the underdogs. They're trying to hold them back, right? If we go to the Saturnine Gambit and what's happening at the I forget the name of the spaceport. I'm sorry, but the spaceport again, they know they're gonna lose. It's just about holding out for the amount of time that they can. The people that are engaging in the Saturnine Gambit at the wall, they're bracing for an overwhelming force and kind of going around and putting out fires like that is a great story and a great way to tell stories and I would like more of that. I think that that's great. So that said, let's ask a question, which is why do we fight? Why why are we here? Why are we having this battle? And I'll give you a second to think about this. I have a list of things on the next page that we'll talk about. But I wanna put out a little bit more into this concept. I've not heard anybody talk about this. So if somebody else has talked about this before me, let me know so I can credit them, and maybe reach out and see if they want to collaborate at all. But I think we need to approach scenarios from the concept of there is a main character and there is the antagonist. Okay. And sometimes you're going to be the main character in the battle, and sometimes you're going to be the antagonist in the battle. We just need to accept that that's the case. So, in trying to come up with a way to represent this, I went to the movie Fury, which is a divisive movie when it comes to World War II movies for a variety of reasons. But if you like a movie just for having tanks in action, it is a sufficiently fine tanks in action movie. And there are two battles in this movie that are essentially the same concept. Okay, so in earlier in the movie, the Fury, which is the name of the tank, and their company are moving into a town that's held by Germans. And they get ambushed by the Germans, and the Germans are definitely going to lose. There are not enough Germans in the town to hold them back. However, the Germans are making a last stand. They want to take as many of the Americans with them as they can, inflict as many casualties as they can, and hold up the American advance and slow them down so that other things can happen. Okay. In that scenario, the Americans are the main characters. They're the heroes of the fight, but they're getting ambushed. They have to fight off the ambush. Later in the movie, spoilers, the tank Fury, I think, breaks a track, and so it's supposed to hold this crossroads, and it's the only survivor that makes it there. And when it gets there, something happens and it breaks, and they're not going to be able to pull out. And so they're forced to wait for it, make a last stand against overwhelming odds, hold off the Germans for as long as possible, do as much damage as possible, slow the German advance down so that other forces can get into position, right? All of the things that the Germans did in the first fight or in the earlier fight, the Americans are doing in the second fight, but the Americans are still the main characters, right? So we have the Americans on both sides of essentially the same type of fight. And in one case, they're the attackers, and in the other case, they're the defenders. But in both cases, they're the main character faction, right? They're the ones we're supposed to empathize with. They're the ones we're supposed to sympathize with, right? They're the story that we're following. So I'm going to put out this idea that we can create these scenarios in which we have one side, which is the hero side that doesn't need to be good, right? They're the ones we're following. And then the other side is the side that is the antagonists. They're the ones who are supposed to be stopping the heroes from doing whatever they're doing. And when we present it from that perspective, now we have a lot more flexibility to sort of play with scenarios. So let's look at some ideas. So these are just some examples of these. I want to add a few more to this, but each one of these in a future video will create. Again, I want to do a good job at presenting them too and get good at the editing side. So it's going to be a little bit, so be patient with me. But each one of these are going to be their own scenario. So hold the line is you are trying to stop in advance. So there's enemies coming at you. The heroic side, the main character side, let's, instead of calling them heroic, we'll call them the main characters. The main character side is trying to hold the line. The other side is trying to stop that. And the scenario will be built around that the focus of the game being hold the line. And the other side will basically just be trying to stop the other group from holding the line. Break the line is the other side of the scenario, where the main character side is trying to break through some enemy position. And again, the focus of the rules, the advantage, that's, I guess we should have mentioned that. The advantaged player, that's the player that is the main character, they're the ones who are trying to win, and the other side is just trying to stop them from winning. So you're not necessarily fighting over objectives. One side will be trying to accomplish goals, and the other side will be trying to stop them from doing this. Last Stand is where the heroic side is basically just trying to hold out for as long as possible and do as much damage as possible to the enemy. The enemy is just trying to wipe them out. The antagonist side is just trying to wipe them out. So kind of a last stand situation. Assassination is your spearhead assault. We're trying to kill one character. The heroes are trying to kill one character. The antagonists are trying to keep that character alive. That's it. That's the entire scenario. If you're like, wow, that there are some units that could do that instantaneously. Yeah, there probably are, and you should probably not bring those to this game, because you should have a conversation with your opponent before the game to try to make sure that both players are going to have fun. Another pair, although these aren't opposites, one is destroy infrastructure. So we're going to try and blow up a bridge or take down a building or destroy a comm network or bring down a void shield. We're trying to break some piece of infrastructure. And then the other side of it could be, sorry, not the other side, because it's these aren't the same scenarios. Another one could be that you're trying to activate the infrastructure. Maybe there are a series of generators that you need to turn on to do something, or a series of void projectors that you need to turn on to protect something. It doesn't matter. You have to do some activation. This isn't even fighting over objectives anymore. This is probably going to be intelligence checks to try to turn on and off objectives in order to accomplish things. Ambush is, we have a convoy, and the active player, so the active player, the main character player, is trying to stop the convoy or destroy units in the convoy. We could also have the opposite of that, where the main character is trying to get the convoy through, right? So a lot of these lend themselves to, we could have two scenarios on either sides. And then last but not least, we have Breakout, where you are just trying to get as many of your units onto the other side of the board as possible. And the antagonist player is trying to stop you from doing this. So this is sort of where I want to go with this, is to come up with a bunch of these. I think there are 8 here, so probably put in like 2 to 4 more that are scenarios that you can just pick up and play with someone. But I don't think it should be pickup games. And again, we'll talk about that sort of towards the end. All right, so let's talk about these 2 scenarios. So I've kind of laid the groundwork. There's a lot of words there. Let's talk about these 2 scenarios. If you have played Take and Hold, my sympathies. So Take and Hold, there are 3 scenarios in the main Age of Darkness book. I don't know why they decided that 3 was a sufficient number, but whatever. And one of them is literally unplayable. So Take and Hold has 2 player-placed objectives. Already hate player-placed objectives, but whatever. We've got 2 player-placed objectives. Keep in mind that we always put the objectives down before we determine either board sides or even deployment. So you kind of want to keep in mind, but inevitably one objective is going to be closer to one person's deployment zone. The other objective is probably going to be closer to the other person's objective or deployment zone. I think they have to be 12 inches away from all board edges. So they're already kind of towards the center of the board. But yeah, they are worth 3 points. Each time they are scored, you reduce the value by 1, not each turn, which would be fine. Not when give each player an objective, and when they score, it goes down by one. It doesn't matter. Each time they're scored, it goes down by one. So we'll talk about the how bad this is in a minute. Sorry. It's the objectives are removed when you get to 0 points. You have Slay the Warlord for 2 points, Giant Killer for 4 points, which very rarely happens. I've not seen any super heavies yet in just regular games. Last Man Standing for 4. It's kind of a win more condition at this point, and then First Strike at 2. Again, keep in mind that the objectives are worth 3 points the first turn, so you can rack up, pretty easily 10 points, 12 points on the first turn if you kill something. You can do a lot on here. Now, let's talk about this scenario. I feel like I have another slide on this. We'll come back to it though. Actually, let's just go. Yeah, here we go. Here's our problems taking hold. So whichever player goes first, let's say they're going to hold their home objectives. They're going to score 3 for that, plus whatever line they have. So let's say we have Tactical Marines. Pop Tactical Marines on that objective. You're going to score 3 points plus line from that home objective. Okay. Then I have a unit of Terminators and a Land Raider, because why wouldn't you have a unit of Terminators and a Land Raider? They're freaking amazing. And my Land Raider is going to move to the other objective on turn 1, and they're going to get out. Now, if you have models on that objective, you have a decision to make right now. Do you react and move your guys off the objective, because maybe these Terminators are Vanguard too, okay? And just give them the objective, at which point they will score 1 point for that objective, but it goes down to 2 points, right? So now the objectives are only worth 2 each, and it is literally impossible for you to catch up in points at this point. Or, worst decision, you don't react off the objective. They do get out of the Land Raider and charge you. Now they get first strike for killing your unit, and they get 2 points for Vanguard, and they get 1 point for the objective. So now they're at 5 points plus the 5 points they scored on their home objective. So they've got 10 points the first turn, and you have 0. And even if you control both objectives, the next turn you can score at most 8 points, right? So like mathematically, the first player is almost always going to win this scenario. Almost always. There are people that joke about it, that it's an auto win. This is an imbalance that is bad, right? What we want is both players to be able to win or have a chance at winning. That's the end of balance right there. We don't necessarily need symmetrical placement or L-shaped ruins everywhere, kind of controlling everything. This is just a bad scenario. It's just a poorly written scenario to the point where it's basically an unplayable scenario. There are some ways that we could fix this scenario. I think we should just rewrite scenarios, but if you want to try some house rules, the first house rule I would say is don't reduce the value of the objectives when they get scored. Reduce the value of the objectives at the start of each round, I think is what they're called. So turn 1, they're worth 3, turn 2, they're worth 2, turn 3, they're worth 1, and then turn 4 they're worth 0, but you still keep them on the board because you could still score line on an objective that is 0. You could still score Vanguard on an objective that's 0, right? That becomes a little bit more interesting in terms of the way this scenario could work. It's a very easy fix if you want to house rule it, and I think that would be better. It's still not a great scenario, but it's a better way to play it. I want to compare that complete crap show of a scenario, which is a lot, like people have been making fun of it, to the first wave. So I've played the first wave twice. I played once as the loyalist and once as the traitor. So loyalists are attackers, traitors are defenders. This is from the Istvan book, the Drop Site Massacre book, I think is what it's called. But it's online if you want to play it. And I would suggest playing it. I don't have any images handy of the games, unfortunately, but we basically both games I set up a trench line. I put the the objectives in the trench line. So I built the trench line in a shape that holds the objectives. I think there's a picture of it in the previous video. Um, there are 4 objectives. They're each worth 2. They're close to the defender's deployment, but not in the defender's deployment. The attacker scores the objectives. This encourages them to lean into line, and they deploy about halfway up the board. So they're right on top of the defenders. So the board, is 4 feet across. The defenders have the first 12 inches. The attackers have the other 24 inches, and then there's 12 inches in between them. But the attacker really wants the objectives, not necessarily to kill defenders. The defenders score 2 points for each enemy unit that they destroy. This encourages them to lean into vanguard units. And the attackers, I think, have to deploy their vehicles further back. So you can't just like rhino rush up onto the objective, which is fine. And the attacker will take first turn, but there is season the initiative here. And I played this on both sides. I don't remember who won my first game. It was actually a really fun game and came right down to some things. I won the second game as the attacker, but it was a fun, like both times. I think it was a fun game, and you kind of lean into what you're trying to do. The fact that both players are doing different things is really nice, because if you're the defender, you don't really care about holding the objectives. You just want to clear the objectives. So you really want, units that can shoot. And if you melee onto an objective, what you're going to do is you're probably going, to get some vanguard points. You're probably going to try to react off of there, consolidate off of the objective. Because again, you don't care that you are holding the objectives. You're not scoring any points for them. But you do want your opponent to kind of get up on them so you can knock them off and get more vanguard points. And yeah, if you lean into those, it gets really interesting, and it's fun. The only real criticism I have of this scenario is that I feel like the defender should lean into line and the attacker should lean into vanguard. And so you might be able to just flip the point rolls, and like when we do a break the line scenario, we're just going to flip the way that these score, and that will probably fix the problem. And yeah, it's a fun scenario. It's replayable. And we're going to talk about this when we get to the Saturnine scenarios in a future video. The ability to play a scenario and walk away from it and be like, oh, that's the way that worked. Like, I want to play this scenario again because I would do much better the next time around. That is something that I don't feel like the core rule scenarios do at all. Because they're super balanced, or supposed to be super balanced. It's just generic. You don't really learn anything. Whereas with these, there are nuances to them that once you play it, you could be like, yeah, I get that, and I would do this differently next time, on your scenario. So definitely try this one if you've not tried this one. I like it a lot. And again, I like the Forges of Saturn ones so far, as well. Those are good scenarios. And if somebody knows somebody at GW, we could use more of those. That would be great. So the last thing I want to talk about here, because I've gone kind of long, is to talk about the components, at least in my mind, of a good scenario. We've touched on a little bit of this earlier. I think that replayability is huge. We are by definition going to have a finite number of scenarios. And for those of us who want to play more Warhammer, I would want to be able to play a scenario multiple times from multiple sides and not feel like it's getting redundant. And as opposed to take and hold, which if I never play take and hold again in my life, it will be enough. And one of the components of replayability is it has to be winnable from both sides. So we want something that's winnable from both sides, but also is dynamic enough that you are learning, you're getting better, you're understanding the scenario. We don't want it to be so complicated that you can't play, the first time well. But we need some sort of replayability where you don't you don't necessarily feel like you're getting bored playing the same thing over and over and over again. The second component is it has to be viable for pickup games. And this is an unfortunate truth, is that in 2025, and going into 2026, we just have a culture of pickup games where you get online or you go to your hobby store and you're like, hey, do you want to play? Yeah, let's play. And then you play and you brought some pre-arranged list. I do think, and if you're not doing this, I would suggest doing this. I do think the way to really do this is to talk about the scenario beforehand. We're going to do this scenario, and I want to be the defender, or I want to be the main character in this one. And then build your list around that, rather than just try and build a generic balance list like you would for a tournament. I just don't think that's the way to play Horus Heresy. You should. I mean, I have a limited number of models in my collection right now that are painted to a standard that I feel comfortable putting them on the table. So for me, I am kind of limited to my list. But if I had an unlimited collection with everything painted, I would want to build vastly different lists for vastly different scenarios. And I think that'd be really fun. And I know that some of y'all are kicking around with like 6,000 points of Space Marines, that you can put out on the table. And so when you do, make variety, like take advantage of that. I think a good scenario is narrative, and that means it is necessarily imbalanced and asymmetrical. There is a protagonist and there's an antagonist to the scenario, and that's good. I think that's a good thing. I mean, I will die on that hill. I don't think you need balance. I think asymmetry is good. I think people having, I will jump up to this point, people having different objectives. I'm here to do X, I'm here to do Y. And maybe we are going to fight while we try to do those things, but we're not necessarily trying to fight over objective A, B, and C in the middle of the board. And we should have meaningful objectives. You should be trying to do something that makes sense. Like, for God's sakes, like even if you want to use the objectives and the core missions and all that stuff, put pieces of terrain on your objectives, and be like, okay, well, we're fighting over this bridge or this wall or this building or this generator, just so the spectacle is nice. Like, it will be, trust me, you will be like, this is a little bit more fun, this is a little bit more, the story is told, right? My praetor is moved up on this bridge, and like Camba Diaz is making a last stand, and his unit was wiped out and he's the last guy, but I'm going to try and hold this objective for one more turn to try and score some points. Like, that is exactly what we want to see with this game. So anyway, so that's my 2 cents about these two scenarios. If you've not played the first wave, set up a game with somebody that you like and play it out, and see how you like it. And try and build into it, try and build a narrative list that makes sense for that scenario, and just see what you like. And if you try it, put in the comments if you tried it and what you thought, and what you think about the Forges of Saturn scenarios. And yeah, we'll try and create something for the community here that everybody can use and that will be fun to kind of try out together. All right, thanks very much and have a great day.